Hello everyone and welcome to this Gotharman's SpazeDrum demo video. What is the SpazeDrum? It says here on the panel it's an analog drum synthesizer, but it's actually quite a bit more. It does feature fully analog signal generation. That means that you have analog VCOs or analog filters that you can use to create and shape your sounds. But it also has a lot of digital effects on there as well. Digital oscillators, digital filters, stuff that you might know from the Gotharman's Little deFormer 3. It also comes with a lot of the Little deFormer 3's sequencing power, so it's also a fully featured groovebox. You can also load your own wave samples onto the SpazeDrum to sequence them or layer them with the analog or digital sounds that you have created on the machine. And of course you can also deform them using the effects that you have on the machine. So as you can see, there are a lot of sound design possibilities with the SpazeDrum, and it really is a drum synthesizer. That means you can create your own drum sounds from scratch on the device using its wide array of parameters that you can tweak to your liking. Before I demonstrate how this is done exactly, let us just quickly go over some of the specifications of this device real quick. The SpazeDrum is 4-voice polyphonic, so it can play 4 sounds at the same time. But you can actually program up to 16 sounds, or 16 parts, how they are called on these machines, in one preset or project file. And those 16 parts are grouped into 4 analog voices, analog A, B, C, and D. So parts 1 to 4 will go through one voice, parts 5 to 8 go through analog voice B, and so on. And this is also how it's 4-voice polyphonic. Each of the analog parts can sound at the same time. So you have one sound from analog A, one sound from analog B, one sound from analog C, and another sound from analog D. If one or more sounds from the same analog group are playing simultaneously, then it works similar to mute groups in other drum machines or grooveboxes. So the higher numbered sound will cut off the lower number sounds. So that's basically like an open or closed hi-hat situation. So you could have your closed hi-hat on channel 6, for example, and your open hi-hat on channel 5, and whenever channel 5 and channel 6 are playing at the same time, the closed hi-hat will take over. So like this, you can structure your whole sound project in a way creatively that by muting and unmuting tracks and having those, mute groups working for you, you can really create some very complex patterns and sounds using the 16 parts and the 16 sequencer tracks. When it comes to the audio output, you have 2 audio outputs here, left and right, and the left audio output also doubles as a headphone jack, so that can be stereo for a headphone connection. And of course there is MIDI input and output and 9-volt center positive barrel socket input for the power supply. Optionally, you can also order the SpazeDrum with the analog output board. This will give you 4 additional audio outputs, one for each of the analog voice groups. But those are not your typical individual outputs, but they are actual analog outputs. So the analog sound creation for each of those 4 voice groups will go not through the digital effects or digital VCA or filters, but they will go through an individual analog VCA straight out of the device. So this means that it's a true analog sound from start to finish and not a digitally processed sound. Okay, so now let's look at the user interface and then create a sound from scratch. Just like you will find on the Little deFormer 3, there are 2 morph knobs, one for audio morphing and one for sequencer morphing, and then there's a volume knob. Below those, we have 4 edit knobs, which are context sensitive and which can also be mapped to certain modulation targets. And then we have 4 function buttons, which let us control the sequencer and also enter certain function modes for the 16 step buttons down here. On the right side, we have a full color dimmable LCD screen and 4 navigation buttons for the menu. And this is of course different than on the Little deFormer 3, which had a touchscreen. This one is not a touchscreen, but we have a very flat menu structure which we can navigate easily with those blue buttons here. And so let's start with the navigation to create our first sound. Now I can press the edit knob here to go into a menu, and then I can press up or down and go into synth, sequencer, sampler, settings, and so on. But we don't have to do this menu diving at all really when we design a sound or when we want to navigate through the device. This is just to get like a good overview of the structure maybe, or to find some settings which are buried a little deeper, which you don't need so often. So let's click exit and go to the preset select screen here, where I have loaded a new empty preset. Now, before we design a sound, let us just add some sequencer steps so that we can hear it while we're tweaking the sound values. For this, I simply press the steps button, which will allow me to set 16 steps using the step buttons here. And let's just go 1, 5, 9, and 13, just a 4 on the floor beat for the kick drum we're going to design. Now when I press play, we can see the light moving across the 16 steps of the sequencer, hitting our triggers, but of course we don't hear anything yet because we haven't designed a sound yet. So let's do that right now. I will press the steps button again, going out of the steps mode, and here we can now see the first part of our 16 parts flashing and the time of the beat that we created. To design a sound now, we can of course go into the menu here and then just click through the pages, but we can be a lot faster actually by pressing the function button. And when this is lit, then we have quick jump buttons for the different menus which are important for sound design and sequencing. And the first menu we want to jump to is the drum oscillator menu. So I will just simply press drum oscillator. And here we already have the first important decision to make, which percussion oscillator form we'd like to use. Now we have several options here. We can have analog percussion, analog claps, or even digital synthesizer sound as a basic engine for our sound creation process. But let's leave it at the analog percussion now, and also let's leave the transposition at 0 and click into the next page of the flat menu structure for the drum oscillator. To do this, we use the right and left arrow buttons here, and this is actually what makes this interface so nice, because the right hand can just use the buttons here to navigate through the menus quickly, and with the left hand we can tweak the sound parameters or use the function buttons here to jump directly to certain parameters that we want to use. So let's go to page 2 of the analog percussion oscillator. Now we don't hear anything yet because both of our analog oscillators are tuned all the way up. So let's turn them down now. Okay, that's already better. It's not yet kick drum territory, which would be a lot lower, but because we're doing sound design and kick drum sound design, we also want to add some more than just, those static oscillators. And the first thing that we often want to interact with is actually the pitch envelope. And this is pretty cool here. The menu is structured just, to give you this control right away. So the third knob here controls the modulation source for the pitch parameter. And the default value is envelope number 1, which is just a short decay envelope. Now, mod lets us adjust the modulation amount from the envelope going to the oscillators. So let's dial that up now. Yeah, and we already get this kick drum feeling of the falling pitch from the start of the sound to the end of the sound. Okay, let's see what other parameters we have. Let's go one step to the right. And now we have an attack parameter, which is adding a click to the beginning of the sound. So this emphasizes the hit of the drum. And the attack time lets us choose how long this attack hit should be. Shape will let us wave shape the sound a little bit, making it louder and sometimes also harsher. Yeah, it's getting really crunchy up here. And let's just give it a little more thump by just turning that to around 160 there. Buzz is another parameter to make things harsher. Yeah, that's getting really crazy. Let's not do that right now. Let's just keep a regular analog kick drum sound. Let's go to the next page. Here we can add some noise. And also adjust the noise pulse width. And also the noise wave shape, normal or squared. But yeah, for our kick drum, we don't really need so much noise, but of course that is good for snares or hi-hats and that sort of thing. The level parameter lets us adjust the level of the sound into overdrive. or complete silence. Let's go to the next page. Now, here's something that the Gotharman fans will already know, the G-Ray feedback circuit. Now this will add analog feedback in various ways, and we can just turn up the feedback amount, which will give it a little more thump again, but then we can add more G-Ray feedback to really dirty up the sound. And the mode lets us switch between normal, negative, ultra, and ultra negative. And depending on the previous settings that you have adjusted, those feedback modes will have a different effect. And you can really use that to make your sounds totally crunchy and over the top. But yeah, let's just maybe add a little bit of feedback. And then we also have an FM possibility. But let's not use that for now, because right now we're just looking for a normal kick drum. Now we're coming into the modulation part of the menu. So here we can have shape modulation. Shape was the parameter that thickened up the sound a little earlier. And of course, again, we have the choice between the different sources and then the modulation amount. And let's go through the sources that we have on the SpazeDrum now. The first one is envelope 1, which we also used for the pitch modulation. Then we have the negative, the inverse. Then we have a second decay envelope, which you can use, again, inverted. Then the VCA amplitude envelope, inverted. And then we have LFOs that we can set up and use for modulation. And they are global, 16 global LFOs. We have random generators, 4, which are voice dependent. So 4 random generators per voice, not globally. So that's up to 64 random generators. And then we have the 4 knobs here, which we can use as modulation sources, and velocity and CC values from attached MIDI equipment if we use that. To demonstrate modulation, let's go one step further in the menu. For the noise modulation, for example, let's just use envelope 1 as well and just dial up the mod amount. And this can give our initial attack even more presence by just adding some noise there. But of course, we could also choose a random generator, for example, that will generate a new value on each trigger that we place on the sequencer timeline. Yeah, so this would just randomly add noise, which might not be what we want right now, but I thought that just adding a little bit noise at the beginning of the sound using the envelope as a modulation source does sound quite nice. Okay, what else do we have? We can modulate the buzzing and also the FM amount. And on the last page, the G-Ray feedback modulation amount, and then a special parameter, the pitch modulation type. And right now, the pitch modulation that we did in the second page, with the envelope number 1, is applied to both oscillators, both of the 2 oscillators at the same time. But we can switch that to inverted. So one is using the positive envelope signal and the other oscillator is getting the negative. So one is going down, the other one's going up, as you can hear. That's not very useful for a kick drum, but maybe for other sound design. And then we can have it modulate only the pitch of the first oscillator or the second oscillator. Let's leave that at the same right now, because that's what we really want. Okay, that was the drum oscillator menu for the analog percussion oscillator engine that we chose for this sound. Those were already quite a bunch of cool parameters to tweak, but there is more, of course. If we press the drum oscillator button again, we also have a digital oscillator that we can layer on top of the 2 analog oscillators we just adjusted. So let me hit play again. And to make the digital oscillator sound, we just go one step further, and there we also have a level control, which by default is turned down all the way, so we won't actually hear this oscillator. When I turn it up now, we will start to hear it. And right now it's a sawtooth wave, and just like on the little deFormer or other Gotharman synth as well, we can now use our knob here to morph through several waves, from sine waves to some crazy feedback wave. We can also adjust the pulse width of all the waves, and of course tune it. On the second page, apart from the level control, we also have a portamento control, for pitch slides when we use this as a melodic oscillator. And we also have types. We have type 1, which is what we're hearing right now. Type 2 is another digital oscillator engine that is a little softer. Then we have a resonant oscillator engine, a percussion oscillator, 1, 2, 3, cymbal oscillator, clap, and sampler. So yeah, lots of possibilities in the digital realm here as well. And again, we can just layer those 3 oscillators, analog oscillator and digital oscillator, together to form some weird sound or whatever else we want to create. The next section is the filter. Now here we have DGF1, the digital filter 1. So let's really quickly talk about the connections inside the SpazeDrum. Each analog voice has 2 analog sound creation circuits basically, and they can either act as 2 oscillators, what we did right now, or they can act as 2 analog filters. And so if we hadn't chosen the analog percussion engine for our oscillator, but a digital one, we then would have the analog circuit available here as an analog filter pair. Now, if that is a little too abstract right now, go ahead and check out Gotharman's website, because there you have a bunch of diagrams which illustrate this very nicely. But now for our kick drum, since we are using the analog oscillators, we cannot use an analog filter because we already used up the analog sound creation circuitry for our A voice. But of course we can use the digital filters, which are available here, and there are also 2 per part. The settings of those are pretty self-explanatory if you have already used synthesizers in general. On the first page, cutoff, resonance, and the input volume and the mix of the filter, how much the filter effect is mixed with the original audio. Then we have several types of digital filters. Now we have low pass filter, 1, 2, 3, 4, band pass filters, high pass filters. There's a distortion filter, 2 fat sounding filters, and a lo-fi filter, and then there's also low pass filter 5 and band pass filter 4. So yeah, lots of different filter models to choose from. Then we can narrow the filter response. We can set a low point which will always go through before the rest of the filter starts. We can boost the filter signal, and yeah, of course modulate cutoff, the boost, the resonance, and the mix. And then the next menu item is the digital filter number 2, and that one has exactly the same menus. Now on the last page here, we can choose a little bit of a routing. So oscillators 1 plus 2 will be mixed and then sent through both of the digital filters, or the other setting we have is oscillator 1 goes through filter 1, oscillator 2 goes through filter 2. Okay, so now let's just go back to digital filter 1 and listen to how that would sound on top of our analog kick drum sound. Let me press play again and then turn up the mix so that we have a fully wet filter signal. Now the cutoff, of course, works like a cutoff, which with the current low pass filter 1 model is getting a little crunchy at the bottom end. But we can turn up the resonance, of course. We can also turn up the input volume or turn it down so that we don't hear anything anymore. And when we go to 511, we can also overdrive this input. Okay, let's turn on resonance again and listen to some other filter models. Second page here. Yeah, that's the distortion filter. Now I'll just turn that down, and this is just, a Gotharman effect. It'll just mess up your signal, and depending on the resonance and cutoff signal settings, yeah, it'll always just sound a little bit differently, but always totally destroyed. Okay, this is the fat filter number 1, which also goes into self-oscillation when the resonance is high enough. So as you can hear, if you want to have fat and aggressive sounds, then you have plenty of options to do that. And if you don't want that, then you simply don't use them and just tweak the analog sounds more subtly. Yeah, let's just add a little bit of filter cutoff with resonance here. And of course, we can go into the cutoff modulation menu here and also add some modulation. When we choose a random generator, then the sound will be always a little bit different. And maybe let's decrease the modulation amount a little bit so that the modulation isn't as strong. And of course, you can use those randomizers very well for humanizing sounds, or adding just a little subtle bit of modulation to every hit so that it's not just a monotonous kick drum or drum sound all the time. Okay, next up would be the effects section, but let's jump over that and go into the VCA menu. Here we have an ADSR envelope, which controls the amplification or the volume of the sound. And right now this has a very short decay, a high sustain, so the decay is actually not really audible, and then a short release. And when we turn down the sustain, which we sometimes want to do for kick drums which do not have such a sustain, then the sound can get a little snappier, and we can use the decay to, tweak the sound, the fall off a little bit. And when it comes to the fall off, we have several modes for this envelope. Logarithmic right now is good for audio work, but we also have linear, which has a different curve, different slope. And then we have also longer versions, logarithmic ×4 or linear ×4. But logarithmic usually sounds good. On the second page here, we can also choose the output, which is currently the left and right audio output plus the analog board, if that is installed. Now, we can also send this to the master effects, so we can mix all the sounds and send them through master effects, or we can send them through left and right only, or the analog output only. Let's leave that at left and right and analog for now, so that we can hear it in my recorder here, which is plugged into the left and right audio outputs. There's also a drone parameter, and this will just open up the VCA so the sound will come through all the time. So you can now hear, if you have headphones or speakers with good bottom end reproduction, that now the sound is always playing. Even when I stop the sequencer, we still get the sound because we just opened up the VCA. And like the parameter name array suggests, this is good for drones. Let's turn that down. Level is just the overall level or amplification of the VCA. So we have a level for the individual oscillators, but we also have a level for the whole sound here at the VCA stage. Then of course we can modulate, attack, decay, the level, and also the panning, because the SpazeDrum is stereophonic, of course. Now, panning is manual, so this means we can just, turn it left or right, but we can also use a different modulation source, like, a random generator. And now, depending on the value, the sound will just move in the stereo field randomly. But let's turn that to manual and also to the middle again, because that's better for a kick drum. Okay, so this was the VCA, which has an envelope attached to it. But then we have also the envelope 1, which we were using as a modulation source in a separate envelope menu. And there we have the ADSR again, this time just a short decay envelope, which is right now modulating our pitch. And then we have also offset and also the linear logarithmic modes. And here's also the second envelope, which is just a decay envelope, which is currently also set to a very short decay time. Again, we can modulate, attack, and decay and release in this time the envelope amount. And yeah, that is it for this envelope section. So per voice, you have the VCA envelope and one ADSR, which you can just apply to any modulation target. And then you have a decay envelope, which you can apply to a modulation target as well. And of course, each of those modulations can be positive or negative. Okay, now let's jump into the effects menu. The effects menu is a little different than the other menus, because here we can first choose which of the 4 effects we want to edit, and for that we press the edit button and choose between insert effects A1 or 2, because this is an effect that is applied onto the whole analog A group for the first 4 sounds in our system here. So we have insert effects A1, for example, and this would then be applied, to our 4 sounds, and right now it's off, and we can turn that to a certain effect algorithm, and as you can see, there are lots of them. Let's choose, a delay maybe, because that's of course very easy to understand, and then we can say where it is, pre or post fader, and a delay should be post fader, otherwise, our VCA would, turn down the effect. So let's just put that into post, go into the next menu, and here we can, add feedback and the delay time, and also the mix. So let me hit play again, turn up the mix. And there we have also crossfading between the delays on a deep modulation parameter, which again fattens up the sound into something that can also get really crunchy. It's a Gotharman special. And then of course we can modulate these parameters as well. And like I said, all of our parts, all of our sounds, 1, 2, 3, 4 of this analog A group will then go through those insert effects. You can press edit again, choose effect number 2, because we have 2 effects of course, and then let's get something crazy like the glitch shift one. Again, put that post fader and then mix it in. And yeah, here those effects are the same as on the little deFormer 3, so they are deforming your sound beautifully. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too much, so let's just dial that down again. And for the last part of this video, let's look at the morph feature real quick, because if you don't know that yet, that's really awesome. I'll exit into the preset screen again, and now there are morph layers, or actually 2 sets of parameters for the sequencer and the audio. So with those knobs here, we can morph between different audio settings or different sequences. And this morph set buttons tells us on which layer we're currently working on layer A, which is what we've done right now, and also on layer B now, which is a completely new set of parameters. It's the same set of parameters that we've used before, but with different values if we want to. Now right now there's nothing on the layer B, so if we morph, then we will just morph into the empty preset again. So let us just first copy all of our sounds and sequences into the morph layer B and then tweak them. This is very easy. We simply go to copy and then press morph. And now when I morph the sound, nothing happens because they're both the same. So let's go all the way to the right, which would then mean that we will hear the morph layer B, which is also active. So when this button here is lit, everything we do is being adjusted on this second morph layer. And to demonstrate this very easily, let's just go into the drum oscillator again and add some noise. And now when I morph back to layer A, the noise disappears, because on layer A our noise is at 0, like what we've adjusted before, and on layer B it's now at 356. Let's morph over to that. And of course, we can also change the effect. For example, on morph layer B, we want to have some glitch shifting. So now we can morph between our A layer without noise and without the glitch shift effect, or between layer B, which has noise and the glitch shift effect mixed in. So like this, you can create two completely different parameter sets for your sounds, and with the turn of a knob, just, fade between them. And this is really cool for performing because you can just map so many different parameters to this one knob and just completely change the sound if you wanted to, and then go to stuff in between there and really add a lot of variation to your performance. The same thing also works for the sequencers. Now, we're not going to look at the sequencer in depth right now, but let's just switch into the steps view where we have put our 4 steps in here. And for the morph layer B, let us just add, a bunch of more steps. Now this, what we're listening to, is still layer A because the sequencer morph knob is all the way to the left, but then we can morph into this section here. And now, fully to the right, we're listening to this sequence. And of course we can also morph the audio. Something in between. And this is the original sequence and sound again. Okay, I hope this video gave you a good overview of the basic features of the SpazeDrum. Yes, those were just, basic feature overview scenes here. There's a lot more to it, of course. Again, we haven't looked at the samples, we haven't really looked at the sequencer, what it can do. We haven't looked at all the effects, the LFOs, the randomize feature, and so on. So yeah, there's still a lot to be discovered. There is also a song mode, of course, so we can create several presets and chain them together into a song if you want to completely create songs or performances on the device. And yeah, there's MIDI control as well. And yeah, just a lot of fun to be had. So if you have any questions or want to see other features in detail, let me know in the comments below this video. And of course, like, share, and subscribe if you want to be notified when I do more stuff here on YouTube. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you soon.